QuaranJazz. Listen while you're home. Hello and welcome to the 40th and last episode of QuaranJazz, your weekly update on what the independent jazz scene has been doing during the year of 2020 is coming to its season finale. I'm Geisa Fernandes, singer, songwriter, and music researcher from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Let me remind you that in the description of this episode, you will find several ways to contact me. A directly link to my mailing list. Once added, you'll get my newsletter. Well, I must confess you that I have some issues with the frequency. But I do like to share new content, updates about my coming performances, music-related content. You just have to click on the link in the description and see you on the other side. But maybe you would rather contact me using Facebook. In this case, you are most welcome to join the touring jazz musician, named after a guide that I wrote and that I update annually on jazz festivals with open submission processes. That is, the ones that accept material directly from artists. If you think this could be something for you, join the discussion. The touring jazz musician on Facebook. And if you'd like to keep the QuaranJazz mood going on after the episode is over, check out our playlist on Spotify. It includes the songs presented during the episodes and some very nice surprises. I'm sure you're gonna love it. QuaranJazz, the playlist on Spotify. And talking about the playlist, one of this week's updates, it's a song from 1893. Composed by Ernesto Nazaré, one of the great masters in Brazilian popular music. Nazaré was one of the responsibles for mixing the classical music tradition with the music from the streets, the popular rhythms, creating what would become later known as the Brazilian popular music. If you don't know about Ernesto Nazaré, Google it, look for it, it's worth it. The song is called Brejeiro. In 1904, it got its first lyrics. 2013 was Ernesto Nazaré's 150th birthday. For the occasion, the song Brejeiro got brand new lyrics. How come I know so much about the song and about the lyrics? Because I wrote them. 2013 was also the year of my first solo release, and I had to pay this tribute to Nazaré. And yes, as you may have realized by now, this week I am the guest on QuaranJazz. I had to make some adjustments, and this episode will be a little bit different from the others, but I'm sure you're gonna like it. It's gonna be more or less like this. First, I'm gonna put myself in this very difficult role of giving the answers instead of just asking questions. And afterwards, I would like to tell the story of this podcast, how and why it was created, and how the episodes were produced. I was caught in the middle of the pandemic with very little resources, and this podcast is somehow also a matter of creativity and, most of all, a lot of patience. After 40 weeks, it was time to get to know each other a little bit better, right? So let's enjoy together Brejeiro by Ernesto Nazaré, lyrics by yours truly. No talk, all jazz.
Eu acho graça se brejeira você passa. Eu acho graça se brejeira você passa. Você, menina faceira ligeira, vem descendo a ladeira sem nem dar-se conta desse remeleixo nas suas cadeiras. Eu acho se brejeira você passa. Eu acho graça se brejeira você passa. Você, menina, faceira ligeira, vem descendo a ladeira sem nem dar-se conta desse remeleixo nas suas cadeiras. Na comieira hasteei bandeira, estendi tapete, fiz alegrete. Passei na sede, se a São José que lhe pago prenda, se a moça me der atenção. Passo no Carmo todo domingo com rebuçado e flor na lapela, mas a donzela se esquiva e segue seu rumo, deixando a deriva o meu coração. Eu acho graça se brejeira você passa. Eu acho graça se brejeira você passa. Você, menina, faceira ligeira, vem descendo a ladeira sem nem dar-se conta desse remeleixo nas suas cadeiras. Na comieira hasteei bandeira, estendi tapete, fiz alegrete. Passei na sede, se a São José que lhe pago prenda, se a moça me der atenção. Passo no Carmo todo domingo com rebuçado e flor na lapela, mas se ainda assim não der jeito, com todo respeito, brejeiro, eu também recolho meu chapéu. Eu acho graça se brejeira você passa. Eu acho graça se brejeira você passa. Você, menina, faceira ligeira, vem descendo a ladeira sem nem dar-se conta desse remeleixo nas suas cadeiras, meu bem.
You just heard Brejeiro by Ernesto Nazaré. When I wrote the lyrics to Brejeiro, I had one thing in mind. I wanted to pay tribute to the master. I wanted to present the song to new audiences, but I also wanted to respect that 19th century atmosphere, that 19th century charm, if you like. Brejeiro is a well-known melody, and it carries a certain vibe, a certain retro feeling that I didn't want to dismiss. On the contrary, I wanted to embrace it. Therefore, the lyrics, they are comprehensible to nowadays audiences, but they kind of use a certain vocabulary that privileges words that would be more frequently used back then than now. My version was included in the official page of Ernesto Nazaré and listed as one of the events celebrating his 150th birthday. As you can imagine, this acknowledgement made me really proud. And this song is also responsible for very nice moments. It's a joy to see people singing along during my performances, and kind of surprised when I tell them that the lyrics are not original. Then I believe that I achieved my goal. I chose Brejeiro because it represents one of the 4 pillars of my influences. Brejeiro is the Brazilian inheritance, the Brazilian tradition of popular music. I am very influenced by that. My first solo release was all about paying tribute to this tradition that includes samba, bossa nova, and, as I like to call it, our US cousin, jazz. Traditional vocal jazz, especially from the jazz divas. Billie Holiday, first of all, a huge influence and inspiration to me. And also Ella Fitzgerald, Julie London, Eartha Kitt, Anita O'Day, and of course legends like Bessie Smith, Gertrude Ma Rainey, among many others, are examples of this jazz vocal tradition that I consider my second pillar, my second strongest influence. The French cabaret chanson, as represented by Edith Piaf and Maurice Chevalier, are also part of this influence, and the 4th pillar would be the South American tradition. Right after my first album was released in 2013, I started a research on South American rhythms, specifically those from the region of Rio de la Plata, Argentina, and Uruguay. 2016, I went to Montevideo and recorded there with local musicians 2 EPs, both released in 2018. One is called La Nueva Milonga, where I explore the mixing of jazz with South American rhythms such as cumbia and tango. While tango is a chapter apart in my biography, I feel tremendously attracted to the genre. And La Nueva Milonga includes another tribute, my interpretation of the classic A Media Luz, one of the hits of the tango icon Carlos Gardel. Based on the repertoire of this EP, I created the show La Nueva Milonga, presented in Rio de Janeiro and in São Paulo. The last presentation of La Nueva Milonga was 2019, and I had as a guest musician my dear friend Silvano Paliuca Mena, great pianist and composer, who was also a guest here on QuaranJazz. Check it out.
Corrientes 348, segundo piso ascensor. No hay porteros ni vecinos, adentro cóctel y amor. Pisito que puso maple, piano, estera y velador. Un teléfono que contesta, una vitrola que llora, viejos tangos de mi flor y un gato de porcelana pa' que no maulle el amor. Y todo a media luz, que es un brujo el amor, a media luz los besos, a media luz los dos, y todo a media luz, crepúsculo interior, que suave terciopelo, la media luz de amor. 1224, telefonía sin temor, de tarde té con masitas, de noche tango y champán, los domingos té danzante, los lunes desolación, hay de todo en la casita, almohadones y divanes, como en botica coco, alfombras que no hacen ruido y mesa puesta al amor. Y todo a media luz, que es un brujo el amor, a media luz los besos, a media luz los dos, y todo a media luz, crepúsculo interior, que suave terciopelo, la media luz de amor. Y todo a media luz, que es un brujo el amor, a media luz los besos, a media luz los dos, y todo a media luz, crepúsculo interior, que suave terciopelo, la media luz de amor.
On a regular episode of QuaranJazz, this would be probably the point where I would interrupt the guest and say, "Okay, but what about your story? What about your background?" I've just realized that I've skipped this part. Sorry. Well, there you go. I don't come from a family of musicians, although my mother is a very good singer. Actually, I grew up listening to my mother sing while doing the cleaning and cooking. My mother is not a housewife. She's a lawyer. Actually, both my parents are lawyers, but my father died when I was 9 years old. And we were in Brazil in the middle 80s with inflation from 40% a day. And you heard it right, a day. So my mother had to work to provide the money for us to survive. And she herself came from a poor family. She had to struggle a lot for studying and everything. And her message was very clear. Music was something that one should be allowed to do only as a hobby. Never, ever think of it as a profession. And that's how I grew up. And I always liked singing and arts in general. I'm also a writer, and I started participating in the contests at school, especially during high school. And there would win prizes for writing poems and short stories, stuff like that. But anything more serious than that was definitely not welcome. I learned the message and I did my best. My undergraduate studies were in history, and later on I did my master's and my PhD in communication sciences. I'm an expert in visual arts, mainly caricatures, comics, graphic novels, and such. And then, 2016, in October, a very important person in my life, my mother's sister, who was a kind of second mother to everyone, she had a heart attack and stayed for 40 days at the hospital under intensive care. And I stayed with her at the hospital most of the time, well, basically the whole day, because I was not allowed to stay at night, holding her hand, singing for her, and I don't know if you had this sort of experience in your life. It's a very, very strong, very powerful thing. It's something that turns your world upside down. Well, more or less what we are all experiencing right now. After 40 days, she passed away, and I came out of this experience with a clear notion that if life is something so fragile and it runs so fast, the only possible reasonable thing to be done in my case was to accept the right and real place that music had in my life, the importance that singing had in my life. Well, probably you realized by now that another thing about me is that I'm a crying baby. Hope you don't mind. Now that you know a little bit more about my background, I would like to show you the song that gives name to my second EP, the latest one to be released. Its release represents a milestone for me, for it was my first performance in the USA. The song is called So Now, while the reference to Miles Davis' So What is quite explicit. The lyrics make also reference to him. Actually, Miles works almost as a third character in the story narrated in the lyrics. Enjoy! Oh, after the song, we'll have the second half of this episode of QuaranJazz, where I'm gonna tell you everything about the production of this podcast. But for now, So Now. So now you try to convince me this world is not made for me, and I should better just let it go. But tell me first how you did it. You move me so deeply, more than anyone that I've ever known. So now you're crazy about my new song, and miles being played for quite a long time. I wonder whether it's too late for a cab. So now I keep waiting for your call, but you've decided not to show up. And honey, maybe this was all for the best. Sweetie, maybe this was all for the best. Okay, and this is the second part of the last episode of QuaranJazz. Now that you know a little bit more about me, that we are more friends, I would like you to know the story of this podcast. QuaranJazz is not my first experience as a podcaster. In 2018, I started a show called How to Be Indie in Brazil. I produced 26 plus a bonus episode. They were short ones, around 15 minutes long, and they were, as QuaranJazz, produced all by myself. For How to Be Indie in Brazil, I used it to record the episodes in the bathroom, because I believed in that myth that the acoustics of the bathroom is usually the best one if you want to improvise a recording studio condition or something similar to it. Anyway, I didn't go for a season 2 because I accepted an invitation and started writing articles for a magazine called The Old School Project. I used to write articles mostly about Latin musicians, but not only, in short written interviews, introducing them to a larger audience. Now, cut to March, when the pandemic was already a reality, but a very new one, and nobody really knew what to do. So, basically, when we were trying to understand the new reality around us, there was a very nice discussion going on a group on Facebook that I take part of named Jazz Fuel Community, created by Matt Fripp, who is in charge of Jazz Fuel. It's an important name in the jazz scene, an important page as well. And we were there in our Jazz Fuel community, bunch of musicians trying to digest what was happening. And then I came with the idea of producing a podcast so that musicians could tell what they were doing, how they were trying to cope with that situation, and also to inform what was going on in their area. So, bothly to entertain and to inform. My colleagues found it was a nice idea. On the same night, I came out with the name QuaranJazz. And the same night, I created the art for the covers, the logo, the intro. And I think it's a sign of the time, the sign of that time, when we were really rushing and craving to express ourselves somehow. Well, first, there was a bitter reality shock, because I found out that with that previous podcast, How to Be Indie in Brazil, I had almost reached the amount of free space available in the Hub platform where I upload the episodes. But then it was too late. I had already a first guest scheduled, and then I decided to go for the paid plan. Maybe not exactly the wisest thing to do in a year such as 2020, when basically almost all musicians lost money. But anyway, it was too late. QuaranJazz was already there. And the fact that I had already someone willing to take part in my idea made me think that was something that I had to do. And I certainly thank you, Felix Biller. Hope you're listening to this episode. For those who are having a first experience with QuaranJazz, Felix Biller was my first guest in QuaranJazz 1. An excellent musician, very interesting narrative, his commitment to the project, the way he took it seriously, it was essential for me at that point of time, and I thank him very, very much for that. With the episode number 1, I established some guidelines for the narrative. It was clear for the audience that we were not in the same place. After all, social distancing was exactly in the core of the dramaturgy of this podcast. But I also didn't want it to sound as a pre-recorded thing. I thought it would bring an even harder feeling of being isolated to the listener. So I wanted to keep the podcast in this gray zone. Are they having that conversation right now? Or is it a pre-recorded one? And if at least by one episode you had the impression that I was having a live conversation, my mission is accomplished. Although I am aware that it's changed a lot during the episodes. In the very first moments of the pandemic, I didn't want to interfere very much. Actually, I didn't want to interfere at all. I basically listened to the information brought by the guest. There was a feeling of urgency, and this need to communicate at that point of time made me also bring the audios with almost zero edition. But as the months passed, the pandemic became our routine. And although we still have problems to understand this new normal, it was already not anymore the same feeling. Basically, people didn't sound that frightened anymore. Well, it doesn't mean that they were not sad and upset about all the cancellations and stuff, but they knew already they would have to move on. And QuaranJazz became a little bit lighter. At that point of time, I started interfering in the audios a little bit more. So I would have all the hard breathings and little noises in the background cut. or at least I try to. Yeah, because I am not an expert and I don't have the tools of one. So I recorded my lines with my head stuck on my wardrobe, exactly in the same way that I'm doing it right now. And then I would bring it to the sound editing program that I use and try to embellish it. And most important of all, I would try to make it fit to the audio of my guest. And the audio files from my guests, they were always a surprise. I would get per week a different kind of situation. Sometimes perfect and super professional, nothing to be done. And sometimes I really had to clean up a lot of background noises. I listened each and every audio so many times that at the end of the week, I would feel that the guest and I were very close friends. The voice is a very powerful thing, but it's also a very intimate one, a very personal thing. And by the end of the week, I could tell by the drawing of the lines in the sound editing program if you were saying a but, a no, or if you're laughing. I knew your voices, and I had this feeling that you are really making me company week after week. And I thank you all very much for that. And of course, I would have to make lots of pauses while recording because of noisy neighbors, barking dogs in the neighborhood. Anyway, I think what I'm trying to say is that I did this show with all my heart. I didn't want it to be a material that people would feel ashamed to share. I wanted it to be something in a minimal level of quality, able to be presented in web pages or to be, considered part of the portfolio of the artist. And most of all, I wanted each artist to feel that there was someone caring about her or his work. And I want each and every guest to know that I did. I think you people are great, and I would like to thank some extra nice gestures. William Chernoff sent me a transcribed version of the episode. Thank you very much for that. Mario PC has sent me a translation of his episode in Portuguese so that the Portuguese speakers could understand. And extra note, I just wanted you to know that I would like to have had much more Brazilian guests in this podcast. Also, more jazz ladies, more fellows from Africa and Latin America. I've sent a lot of invitations. I really tried to make content, and I listened to each and every contact made to me. Because in QuaranJazz, it was always about the story. Always. Well, not that the music part of the show is defective. No, on the contrary. If you check out the QuaranJazz playlist on Spotify, you will confirm that the level of this podcast was very high musically speaking. And this was another goal, to make the work of musicians available for people outside their local audiences. And I think it's also an interesting question to ask ourselves. Why certain countries were, after all, more represented? Well, my humble opinion is that we should all try to be more like the musicians from the most represented countries in the sense of expressing ourselves. I know some people said it was hard for them to record something in English. Totally understand it. It is a constant struggle when we are dealing with a foreign language. And this brings us to another behind-the-scenes note. I always asked my guests in the message that I've sent them with the instructions on how to participate on the podcast. I asked them to introduce themselves. And by that, I meant literally, saying, my name is... Well, the reason for that is because I might not be able to pronounce your names right if you don't say it yourself. Simple, but true. My name is Geisa. It's not a common name, not even in Brazil. So I know, because I have my name frequently mispronounced, how unpleasant it is when people, just pronounce our names in the way they think it is at a first glance without giving any thought to it. So I try to be respectful in this sense. Not all guests seem to read carefully the instructions because some of them didn't pronounce their names, and then I had to check out on the web some place, some interview, whatever, where they would have their names pronounced loud. Kind of funny, right? But it cost me a lot of extra work, believe me. So here's my advice. Next time someone asks you to introduce yourself, it's not because of a lack of respect or because you are the less known artist on earth. No, there's a very simple and practical reason for that. The jazz community is an international one, so we have to deal with all the possibilities concerning the sound of artists' names. And since we're having such a free, open conversation, I thought I could get you interested in the do's and don'ts of a podcast guest. Let's check?
Yes!
Number 1, it's a don't. Do not try to change the show. Exactly that. Believe it, I had some proposals of people who would like to take part in QuaranJazz, but they didn't want it to be as an audio. They wanted it to be in a video format. Or even after explaining them that the show was recorded, they wanted to have their participation live. And I have nothing against the requests themselves. They are okay, but not for this podcast. Now imagine you are invited to a birthday party on Saturday night, and then you say, "Oh, I would love to go, but can you please change it for Sunday brunch?" I didn't mind. I simply explained my point. But I wonder how professional journalists would react to that. I think it makes everyone a little bit upset because each show has its own storytelling, its own dramaturgy, its own way of presenting the ideas. And if you change it, you lose the point. You lose the show's soul. So it's a big don't. Don't do it. Number 2 goes without saying after number 1, but this time it's a do. Do follow the rules. If the host asks you to send the files in a particular way, for instance, using Dropbox or WeTransfer, well, do it. Even if you'd rather prefer to use another platform or just send your voice recordings through WhatsApp. There is a reason why the host is asking that. It follows a certain organization. For professional journalists, this may imply in the rules of the house. So you can either decline an invitation, and that's fine. No one gets mad because of this. But once you've accepted an invitation, podcast, radio show, TV interview, play the game. Please, that includes the amount of time that you have reserved for you. As you can see, QuaranJazz episodes, they vary a lot. Some of them are very short, some of them are very long, and this comes exactly because of this unattended rule. I'm not saying that's a problem for the QuaranJazz listener, but it can be a very big problem in other media. So believe me, it's good advice. And once you're playing by the rules, number 3 is about showing your best. And I'm not saying this in the sense of only talking about good things that happen in your life or the highlights of your career. As a matter of fact, it's very boring when someone comes with a narrative that from minute 0 up to the end, it's only pointed with great stuff. You know why it's so boring? Because we are not like this, because we are all humans, and we know that we all have our shady sides, we all have failures and projects that were completely mistaken in our lives. You know, this kind of thing. Also very interesting, don't be afraid of it. But I'm not talking about it. I'm talking show your best in the sense of what is asked for you to do. In a very practical example, if you're invited to a podcast and you're supposed to send audio files, try to find a silent place to record these audios. It makes a huge difference. And look who is talking. The lady with the head and the wardrobe. But that's the best that I could have. If you can do better, go ahead. And this goes for any invitation. Audios or videos. I know that even in the pandemic, we were all busy people, maybe even busier than in the normal times. The new normal is really a challenge. And I am aware that this is not the most famous podcast in the world, but you know what I'm also aware of? That each guest is unique. And if people listen to some material that you've sent, to a show that you're invited, or to a gig you want to get, a festival you want to take part in, and you sound lousy, people may have problems to realize how unique you are. Each show, each podcast, each gig is very important because you are taking part in it. So act accordingly. Number 4, do your homework. What do I mean by that? If you're invited to an interview, any forum, check out what it's about. The most interesting episodes are the ones when my guest clearly had an idea what a show was about. And because they took their time and listened to one of the episodes, they could, again, play the game much easier. The same goes for an interview. You have to know at least something about the journalist, read a previous article, whatever. But try to inform yourself. It makes all the difference for the final results and makes the chances that you're going to be invited again much higher. Think about it. And last but not least, number 5, being nice is optional, but being a professional is an obligation. That means that you don't have to thank the person that invited you to an interview, any kind of gig, but once you accepted to take part in a show, professional behavior is mandatory, and that includes replying to important messages, minding deadlines, and such. Well, and the thank you message is always very nice. Remember, life is all about details. Well, my dear listener, the last episode of QuaranJazz is coming to an end. As you know, there are several ways to keep this conversation going. Check the description of this episode and you will find the link to my mailing list. You will find also a link to my webpage, geisafernandes.com, and the contact form there works. Try it and you'll see. You'll also find a link to the QuaranJazz playlist on Spotify. No talk, all jazz. With all the songs presented during the episodes, some nice surprises as well, and the link to the Social Distancing Festival. I know that I've been repeating it quite a lot, but if you haven't checked this amazing call for action, go for it now. The Social Distancing Festival believed in QuaranJazz from the very beginning and included the podcast on their webpage. Thank you so much for that. I failed to find the words to express my gratitude to you guys. Thank you very much indeed, sincerely. And also a huge thank you to all my guests. Some jazz ladies were especially supportive and had written me and given me feedback on the show. Thank you very, very much. Yuli Falkovic, Leslie Wells, Andrea Black, Saul Jang, Andrea Wolper, Arlette Hovenha, Lauren Bush. Thank you for the very supportive messages. I really want this to be the first of many future collaborations. All of you, all my guests, are now part of my story as well. And you, my dear listener, you are the goal of it all. Without you, there is no QuaranJazz. So thank you very much for the company. I will now bid you for the last time farewell. And as usual, I will leave you with a song released on my EP. So now, that's a jazz version of a poem by Edgar Allan Poe. I took extracts from The Raven, one of his most known poems. You know, the one where the raven keeps saying, nevermore, nevermore. Yeah, this one. And how I turned Edgar Allan Poe to jazz, it's a kind of funny story. I am not actually a frequent reader of Edgar Allan Poe's work, but I am a huge fan of the animation show The Simpsons. And in one of their episodes, they showed, well, basically they presented the poem The Raven performed by Simpsons characters. And I found the poem very interesting and trying to get more information about it. So I looked for the complete version of the poem and started reading it. And while reading it, the melody from the words, they became clear to me. And they were pure jazz. Nevermore points out a route that I definitely want to follow in future works, and it suits so nicely as a closure for a season finale episode, because QuaranJazz also Nevermore. This is Geisa Fernandes, singer, songwriter, and music researcher from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Thank you very much for the ride. I really enjoyed it. Muito obrigada. And now, ladies and gents, Nevermore.
Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. There's some visitor, I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this and nothing more. And the raven ever flitting, still sitting on the ballad boost of palace just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight of his streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And the silk and satin certain rustling off each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before. So that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, there's some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. Some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is and nothing more. And the raven ever flitting, still is sitting on the ballad boost of palace just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seemings of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight of his streaming throws his shadow on the floor. Much I marvel at this ungainly foe, to hear discourse so plainly, though its answers little meaning, little relevance bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door. Bird of this upon the sculpture burst above his chamber door, with such a name as Nevermore. And the raven ever flitting, still sitting on the ballad boost of palace just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight of his streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And myself run out a shadow that lies floating on the floor, shall be
QuaranJazz. Listen while you're home. QuaranJazz, a podcast by Geisa Fernandes.